We have heard a lot about Apple's plans for the next entry-level MacBook Air and Mac Mini, but one mystery M2 Mac that we still don't know too much about is the entry-level MacBook Pro, and I think we can learn a lot about what kind of MacBook will come in to replace this laptop based on what Apple is targeting for the new MacBook Air, which could make this new entry-level M2 MacBook Pro the MacBook that you'll really want. Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and I just want to remind you that if you aren't subscribed already, get subscribed. And if you're a returning viewer and want to talk to me, well, hit me up in the comment section, and don't forget to leave a like because I really want to hear your thoughts on what Apple can do with their lower-end Mac lineup, like this entry-level M2 MacBook Pro, because I think these are the Macs that most people should be getting. So first of all, let's dispel some earlier rumors we received about a new entry-level M2 MacBook Pro that would keep the same design as its predecessor, the M1 MacBook Pro, all the way down to keeping the touch bar. Now, these rumors started to circulate right before Apple's March event, and a lot of sketchy last-minute leaks said to expect the new M2 chip to debut in an entry-level MacBook Pro without any sort of design changes, with rumors even saying that Apple would still retain the touch bar. And yeah, you watch that event, you know that didn't happen. I always thought these rumors were a little sketchy because if Apple was going to go through the effort of removing the touch bar on their highest-end MacBooks, it made no sense to me to keep that on the lower-end MacBook Pro, because that touch bar is supposed to be a pretty expensive component. It's an OLED display strip, so why wouldn't Apple remove it to replace it with lower-cost function keys? If anything, Apple could ship the same exact body as the 13-inch MacBook Pro, remove the touch bar, and either sell it at a lower price or sell it at the same price with a higher margin. And the biggest indicator that these rumors may not be true is that, again, we did not see this MacBook Pro at Apple's March event, and instead we got a whole new computer with the new Mac Studio. So with that in mind, what can we expect for the design of this new M2 MacBook Pro? Well, this is difficult to answer since we haven't heard any concrete design rumors for a new entry-level MacBook Pro, with most of the rumors being focused around the new redesign of the MacBook Air. However, it seems very un-Apple-like to have their entry-level MacBook receive a much sought-after redesign, which would lead to the entry-level MacBook Pro being neglected if it wasn't changed. Like, who's gonna buy that MacBook Pro if it keeps the same design and just has an M2 chip in it, while this new M2 MacBook Air has a fancy new redesign and then also has a lower price point? It just doesn't make much sense to me. I also look at the history of the MacBook Pro for the past few years, and Apple has always had some sort of lower tier offering that had a similar design and styling to what was offered on the premium level. While it may have lacked certain ports or features on the inside, the outward design was always pretty similar. Therefore, I think the likeliest answer for a M2 MacBook Pro redesign is the most obvious answer, and that is that it will be a stripped-down version of the 14-inch MacBook Pro. So this would mean that it would come with the same squared-off body, the new front design with the notch, and I think it would retain a good number of ports that the MacBook Pro currently has. For example, I think we can expect it to have 2 out of the 3 Thunderbolt ports, a MagSafe port for charging, and the SD card slot. Maybe even the HDMI port thrown in depending on how much future bandwidth M2 chips will be able to provide to these ports. Furthermore, I think we could be in for a surprise with the display quality of this device, considering the recent rumors are saying that the new MacBook Air redesign will stick with a regular LCD display instead of a mini LED display. So it's possible that Apple could choose to use the same 14-inch panel for the entry-level MacBook Pro display, giving users a reason to upgrade to the M2 MacBook Pro over this future entry-level M2 MacBook Air. So if they focus a lot on this design and having the same kind of outward features that consumers can see on this MacBook Pro, that must mean cuts are coming somewhere, and I think that would actually happen internally. I believe this MacBook Pro will be stripped down pretty heavily in certain areas. First of all, it will use an M2 chip instead of the M1 Pro or M1 Max chip. Now, the M2 chip will feature the same 8-core CPU design as the M1 chip with 4 high-performance cores and 4 energy-efficient cores, and while each of these individual cores will be stronger, they still should score lower in multi-core performance than either the M1 Pro or the M1 Max. The bigger downgrade for this chip will be in GPU performance, where the M2 is rumored to come with a maximum of 10 GPU cores, which would still be 6 cores lower than the fully binned M1 Pro. However, the most important area where the M2 chip will beat any of these M1 chips is in single-core performance, making these Macs feel snappier and faster for most users, even during basic tasks. And perhaps even more importantly than the performance of these M2 chips is the efficiency of the chips themselves. We already know that the M1 is a very efficient chip, leading to computer designs that require little or actually literally no active cooling systems, and because of this efficiency, they can run for a very long time with smaller laptop batteries than what is found in the bigger MacBook Pro. So it's easy to imagine where Apple can start to make internal cutbacks in the M2 MacBook Pro to lower the cost. An M2 chip would require a less beefy cooling system, and it's likely that Apple would reduce this cooling system that is currently in the MacBook Pros into a single fan design with less heat pipes. Furthermore, Apple would also be able to lower the battery capacity in the 14-inch design. I imagine Apple can reduce this component to the same 58-hour watt-hour battery, which would cut down on battery component costs. And it would also make the MacBook Pro a little lighter as well, without this bigger battery and this less advanced cooling system, shaving off weight from the current 3.5 pounds of the 14-inch model. Perhaps the biggest cost-saving measure will come with storage and memory configurations. The current 14-inch MacBook Pro starts with 512 gigabytes of storage and 16 gigabytes of memory, while all the M1 Macs start with 256 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigabytes of memory. I expect this to continue with the M2 MacBook Pro, starting with 256 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigabytes of memory, and perhaps only being able to be maxed out to 16 gigabytes of unified memory. With that in mind, an M2 MacBook Pro with a good amount of ports, respectable power, amazing thermal efficiency, great battery life, and enhanced specs like a mini LED display with a similar design to the 14-inch MacBook Pro, well, that could be a way better purchase for most users over something like even the newer M2 MacBook Air rumored redesign, which would focus on being thinner and lighter, but with a still pretty limited port selection. I think this M2 MacBook Pro for around $1,300 or at the maximum $1,500 with the specs I listed above would be a really compelling product. And I think a lot of users would pick this design over the M2 MacBook Air for features like more ports and for upgrades like an HDR-capable mini LED display. The only thing I really don't know is when we can expect this M2 MacBook Pro. There are rumors saying that M2 MacBooks or Macs will be at Apple's WWDC 22 event for this year, and that is less than a month away. So it's possible we are on the verge of it being released, but it's hard to tell because if this does have a similar design to the existing 14-inch MacBook Pro, it would be hard to get leaks on this design, considering it would look pretty much the same in the manufacturing line and in the design schematics where these products usually leak. But I am hopeful we will see this product sooner rather than later, and if it's not going to be at WWDC 2022, I think we will at least get an announcement by the end of this year. And with my recent video about how I talked about how you don't really need an Apple desktop anymore, this entry-level M2 MacBook Pro might be the best balance of price, performance, features, and form factor to make it your next Mac. But yeah, let me know in the comments below. Are you interested in this M2 entry-level MacBook Pro, or do you think this will be outshined by the rumors of a radical redesign to the MacBook Air? Also, if you like this video, be sure to leave me a like. If you want to see more, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.